All right, this is an essay I wrote several years ago, in 2018 to be exact, and even more exact, on September 11th, 2018. So on that particular anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And I wanted to address those in part, yes, but I also wanted to tie it into some of the struggles in my past and how, in those particular instances, I saw myself as the terrorist, if you will, as the cause for destruction, and even more than that, I wanted to look at these two things side by side and focus, at least between the lines, on the rebuilding, on the healing and the forgiving and the moving on and the taking advantage of life, and all that offers, one day at a time. And so this essay will start on September 11th, 2001. And from there, as it unfolds by looking at certain important events that happened in my life from that point on. So you'll hear a lot of 1 day away, 2 day away. And so I'm kind of retroactively going back to September 11th, 2001, when those attacks first happened, and then looking ahead at what I now know happened in the years to come, including my own mistakes, right, and overcoming them. So this particular essay built around the word journal. And so again, it's going to kind of unfold like a journal, I think. So journal, from the old French journal, meaning a day, time, a day's work or travel, or properly that which takes place daily. From late Latin diurnalis, if I'm saying that correctly, meaning daily, from the Latin dies, meaning day, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European dieu, meaning to shine. September 11th, 2001. 1 day away from finishing Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. 1 day plus a few minutes away from discussing in my college humanities class that same novel. Its setting, a culture on the threshold of great change, and its title, borrowed from this haunting stanza in W.B. Yeats' poem, The Second Coming. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dim tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. 2 days away from reading about patrons at a local shopping center and how on that blood-dimmed morning they huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, before this giant wall of televisions, because the witness of one TV was not enough to believe the unbelievable, I guess. All leaning on each other and crying, and one vomited, the article said, and others swore, and others still, very still, fell to their knees and prayed, or called home, and in a similar pleading tone said, "I love you," or "I am sorry," or "Please forgive me," and "I love you," again, because what else was there to say? 5 days away from sitting crisscross applesauce on my bed, and in my journal, a long, winding prayer in and of itself, struggling to find the right words with power enough to stay the growing plumes of mass hysteria and prevent, inside me, the innocence from drowning. 6 days away from finding them, or maybe from those finding me, or maybe from those words finding me. Either way, something was found, and all I can say is that words really are more powerful than the sword, which truism can be a very good thing or a very bad one, depending on how we use them. Because I've been cut down by words before, long rat-a-tat-tat-tat strings of them. Some I saw coming a ways off, others caught me by complete surprise, exploding in my face, sending single letters like sharp shards deep into my heart, where they then took up lodging and never paid rent, which type of boarder is always too costly and never worth it, and always worthy of eviction sooner rather than later. Emphasis on sooner, please. But more often than not, I have been healed by words. I have been protected by them and defended by them and made free by them. And do you realize that sword is just the word words all mixed up? I mean, how cool is that? Pretty cool to use two little colloquial ones that never hurt anyone. 13 days away from borrowing a car and then driving across campus to pick up for our date the girl I loved, whose name meant divinely tall and who had long legs and long hair and bright hazel eyes, and about whom I would years later write this simple love poem entitled 29,999. The average adult, when resting, breathes up to 30,000 times each day. But that night when I saw you zesting, you took my breath away. 13 days and 30 minutes away from taking her to the park, where we then proceeded to dance in the dark to love songs burned on a blank CD, and where afterward I surprised her, I think, by getting down on one knee and proposing. But not before reading in a very shaky voice an epic poem chronicling our story, which was not really a poem at all, but which did have a certain regular beat, unlike in that moment my heart, fast, faster, fastest. 13 days, 45 minutes, and a couple seconds away from the girl who loved me back saying yes. And then little else, because it was one of those moments when there wasn't really room for words, let alone the lips that speak them. Only our body language, which at times can be hard to read, but not in that moment. 97 days away from standing before that same girl and looking into her eyes and saying, I do. Such little words for the enormity of the commitment. And then kissing her in the presence of God and his angels and the witnesses and the oohs and ahs and sniffles of our closest family and friends. 97 days plus 8 hours away from consummating those two little words, and from confirming in my heart what my mind had learned years before about the Latin origins of that word consummating, meaning the highest together. 372 days away from deciding, as far as in the moment split-second decision-making goes, to start a family. Which social, emotional, physical, spiritual construct would, in the midst of some very hard years, be the sole means of lifting me up over and over again when it was my center that could not hold. 405 days away from conceiving the first in that growing family and confirming in my heart what my mind had learned years before about the Latin origins of that word, conceiving, meaning the taking in and holding together. 677 days away from checking into the hospital with the mom-to-be who, though just 20 years old then, was not really a girl anymore, and who strangely had become this pulsating vehicle for the unknown visitor about to arrive from his far-off planet. 678 days away from holding her up in bed with one hand while stroking back her hair with the other, and then helplessly watching her grab at her once flat stomach and then scream and cry and sweat and bruise my forearm from squeezing it every 5 minutes, every 4 minutes, then 3 and 2 and 1. 678 days, 19 hours, and 24 minutes away from watching our firstborn son with his dark matted hair slide into this world, also screaming and crying and sweating and bruising and squeezing, or trying to anyway, with those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slow-moving little fingers. 678 days, 19 hours, and 24 minutes plus a few seconds away from standing beside that disheveled, suddenly silent bed in awe and love, yet shaking with fear, so much fear, at the sight of my wife and child lying before my newly opened eyes, these two exhausted extraterrestrials, slimy and bloody and naked and gray, then pink, beautiful and hungry. 1,362 days away From my second son arriving in much the same way, except to say the labor was harder and the squeezing of my forearm longer, and he was so bruised and swollen that several days passed before he opened his eyes for the first time and saw in the light that had always been there our beaming faces overflowing with love, and his mother's nourishing breast also overflowing with love, and his older brother who, whether out of love or spite or in an innocent wave of 2-year-old curiosity, proceeded then to poke him in the eye over and over and over again and say, "Happy, happy, happy." And we were. 2,101 days away from the much and equally anticipated moment our third son, hefty and healthy and ready to play football, came charging out of his own dark designated stadium tunnel and onto the playing field, with its bright lights shining and the banners waving and the frenzied crowd chanting his name, ready, so ready to watch him help carry the ball. And our family down the stretch when the going would get tough, which it got in the fourth quarter of that same year. 2,272 days away from anarchy being loosed upon my unsuspecting world, meaning my wife, who was and is and will continue to be the center around which all things circle and toward which everyone rightly gravitates, and who did not deserve to be hurt but was, which word, hurt, is just too small to adequately describe the pain she endured, which is why I use words like hijacked and attacked to instead describe what I did, which are words I wish did not exist, but do. And even after all these years, I can still recall with vivid clarity, as if watching it play out on a wall of high-def televisions, because the witness of one TV cannot be enough, how I blindsided her with my admission of deceit and addiction, and how her shuddering body took the impact, and how her heart began to sway and her long legs began to buckle, and how she finally came crumbling down low, lower, lowest, before my feet on ground zero, this unrecognizable convulsing heap, a mere shadow of what once stood so proud and beautiful and tall. And in her eyes' reflection, as she looked at me and wondered how and when and why, a bloody terrorist shaking at the sight of himself. 2,272 days plus maybe a second away from the beginning of a lot of very dark days, and from confirming in my heart what my mind had learned years before about the Latin origins of that word, anarchy, meaning without leader. And from struggling then to reverse that darkness and become that leader, and begin in believing in words like recovery and healing, and phrases like good things to come, and ideas like our love will be stronger, which cliche sounds impossible, but only because our understanding of love is so finite. It is true, though. It is absolutely true. 2,273 days away from the first day of that long and arduous diurnal process that was the building and rebuilding and rebuilding of not just a skyscraper or a couple of blocks or an iconic city, but the equivalent of an entire nation, a stronger, more trusting, loving, united nation, which thing is very hard to do when you are both the hijacker and the hijacked. And harder still when there are 1,000 other little hijackers inside your body and splayed across your past that have to first be searched out and then forced from their hiding places, every one, and then arrested and tried and convicted and executed, brutally executed, and yet listened to and understood and hugged and prayed for and loved and forgiven, which is perhaps hardest of all. 2,524 days away from relapsing terribly, so terribly, and deciding once and for all to be done with addiction, because science and psychology and studies about the brain and pay-by-the-hour counselors and calculated recovery steps be damned. Sometimes it is within our power to just wake up and choose to be different. And I am. 2,853 days, give or take a few away. From the moment another son theoretically would have been welcomed into our family had our pattern and planning and procreating not been hijacked and steered off course, and whose ghost presence, like that of a tall missing building, is uncomfortably noticeable on the uneven cityscape that is my life. 2,854 days away from asking that little boy's forgiveness. And then in reply, hearing the laughing and the teasing and the crying and the fighting and the whining and finally the making up of the 3 little boys I already had, who were just down the hall in the living room, which is where I ran and where I took them in my arms and where I had them take me in theirs closest. Because even in the midst of great despair, especially in the midst of great despair, there is no safer place than someone's arms. 3,538 days away from that 4th and final missing son joining our family, no longer angst or apparition, but a living, breathing, huffing, puffing, 10 pounds, 6 ounce reality with a heart so big and so beautiful and so kind that it probably weighed 8 of those 10 pounds, and who, because of that heart, is always the first to get a tissue for his mommy when, happy or sad, she is crying, and who came into this world in the same way as the brothers who preceded him, after a hard gestation period and an even harder labor, accompanied, as always, by the same old screaming and crying and sweating and bruising and squeezing. All of which reminds me of another love poem I once wrote, albeit a different kind of love, the kind that really matters, the kind that gives birth to second chances, even for terrorists like me. Deliverance. Might Mary have hoped for an easy delivery? Might she have looked outside the stable door and made a wish? Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. Asked God, to whom nothing was impossible, not to be torn asunder? Assumed that because by miraculous means he had planted the seed, he might also arrange for an immaculate birth, for labor free from pain. In her young girl heart, did she ever wonder if this little baby whose name is salvation really had to come at all, let alone by blood and water? And then there was today, September 11th, 2018, 6,209 days removed from that horrific morning. Today, the threshold of an almost certain Indian summer, which term is often used to describe that period when sunshine and warm temperatures return after the first killing frost, and about which the fireside poet John Greenleaf Whittier wrote in 1834, not long before our own country would endeavor to heal what it had divided. This poem. The shadows melt and fall apart, and smiling through them round us lies the warm light of our morning skies, the Indian summer of the heart. In secret sympathies of mind, in founts of feeling which retain their pure fresh flow, we yet may find our early dreams not wholly vain. Today, at the end of which I can find no finer way to honor those that fell and those that stayed standing and those that helped others stay standing when they too were weak and want to fall, than to recount just a few of the things that happened to me after sunrise. I woke up, which is wonderful to be able to say. And then I went to work and it was boring, which is also wonderful to say. And then I came home and wasted 4 hours trying to help a contractor solve an electrical issue that existed before we bought our home. And he couldn't find a solution, but it still cost me $243.77, which waste of time and money is wonderful too, isn't it? I then emptied the dishwasher while my wife made dinner and cleared the table after dinner while she ran errands, which chores are a wonderfully repetitive, monotonous thing to do. And then I did the dishes, and I ruined a spoon by turning on the garbage disposal without checking it first, which spoon now adds a certain level of excitement and danger when eating yogurt. And in the last few moments of light, I sat on the couch with my boys and we talked, which we don't do often enough, and which I am determined to change, and which form of deliberate parenting is perhaps best summed up by a friend's daughter who, when she was just a toddler, told her parents that she needed their intention, meaning attention, which is what we all need, isn't it? And then it was time for bed. And then my wife came home from running her errands and asked for my advice, which I forthrightly gave, but not in the way she wanted, I guess, which is why she became frustrated with me, frustration is a wonderful thing to quietly receive on a day like this. And then I put on my pajamas and brushed my teeth and said my prayers and thanked God for my life and my wife and my 4 little northern stars already sleeping in their own rooms, who, by the way, are not so little anymore, and who delight in annoying each other more than I'd like to admit, but whose steady brightness has on so many other occasions been my guiding, comforting light when the night was dark and I felt all alone. And then I crawled into bed and snuggled up beside the girl I love and who loves me back, and looked into her eyes, her bright, shining hazel eyes, those 2 monuments to hope and courage and love and forgiveness, beaming, always beaming high, higher, highest, into the sky, then past the stars and the planets to the great beyond, that infinite space from whence we came and to where one day we will all return. And now here I am, typing away while she sleeps, trying to find something meaningful to say in this journal of sorts, only to realize anew that there is meaning around us every single day, if we just look for it. And that even when it is cloudy, the sun is back there shining, fighting to get through, which sounds a little cliche, I know, but maybe we need a little more cliche in our lives, a little more same old we can count on. Besides that, what else is there to do on days like today? Except let go of hurt and let go of the things that bother us and the things that try to tear us apart, so that our arms are more available to hold close those people closest to us. Which word, us, is a really short but beautiful word, and the only one I know of worth building around and rebuilding and rebuilding one single day at a time.